So, regular listeners to the podcast will know that we're taking a little bit of a week off. After 211 episodes and quite a variety of bonus episodes in between, we've not really had a week off. Leah's managed to have one, but because I edit things together, even when it comes to bonus weeks, I've still got work to do. So, this was a much needed break for myself to sit back, chill, and relax with no work to do. We'll be back as normal from next week on the podcast with our usual mix of reviews, including recent releases, long-awaited deep dive into one of my personal favourite musicals, and in the coming weeks we'll be looking at films such as the Airport films of the 70s, Flash Gordon, Ice Cold Alex, a film that I've still never seen, Lost in Space, Sexy Beast. The list of deep dives that we've got coming up is huge, and it keeps getting added to thanks to every suggestion that we get from you guys out there every time that we put a question of the week out. But as I said, this is a week off. So what have I done? I've realised that I can't shut down. Now, regular listeners to the podcast will know that I've been watching the Friday the 13th franchise over the past couple of weeks. Why, I hear you ask? Well, it kind of came about because a few months ago we mentioned that A24 and Brian Fuller were going to be working together on a TV series called Crystal Lake, which was going to reinvigorate the Friday the 13th franchise. And bear in mind, this is a franchise that I've never really had much love for. I'd only ever seen 4 of the films in the franchise: Freddy vs. Jason, the original Friday the 13th, Jason X, and of course, Takes Manhattan. But I'd never ploughed through the whole series. Now, when we mentioned that A24 were going to be developing Crystal Lake with Brian Fuller, it got me excited because Fuller brings something special to everything he does. From Pushing Daisies, Dead Like Me, Hannibal, American Gods, he's always been quite creative in his vision towards any properties that he plays with. And maybe Fuller was the person who could bring something a bit fresh, something a bit different, and something that makes it not just feel like the Friday the 13th series is a poor man's Halloween, because let's be honest, that's what it comes across as most of the time. However, it is worth noticing that Brian Fuller has a history of being attached to shows and then having creative clashes with the producers and abandoning it to move on to something else. Or his ideas do come to fruition, but then sadly get cancelled sometime after the first season. He was at one point on board with the Interview with the Vampire series, but then he stepped off that before it actually went into production. And to be fair, the end result of the Interview with the Vampire series is absolutely fantastic and well worth checking out. But Fuller had no involvement in what we finally got. But like I said, I've seen 4 of the Friday the 13th franchise before, so I started from the beginning and worked through them. And the results were, well, I really don't know why they've endured the popularity so much, to be honest. It's quite telling that my favourite one out of all the series after this watch through is the one where he shares screen time with another horror icon, and that is Freddy vs. Jason. It's fun, it's energetic, it's also quite good with the horror delivery, capturing the aspects of both the different franchises really well, and melds them together in a solid way that just about works. Yes, the third act is a bit messy, but it's fun in a Nightmare on Elm Street kind of way, not necessarily a Friday the 13th kind of way. Others that are previously seen were the original, Manhattan and Jason X. The latter two there, I always thought were bad, right from the very first time that I watched them. That hasn't really changed on this rewatch. The original still holds up well, and I quite liked the second entry, which I got to watch for the first time, as the focus moves to Jason, and the lore of Jason, this unkillable killer, finally starts to build. The reboot, which picks up after the original film and then proceeds to revamp the series, does a pretty solid job of moving the film series back to the horror roots, but the rest of the films are a mixed bag of bad to terrible. The third entry, in particular, which was lent to the 80s 3D gimmick back when they used to have red and blue or red and green lenses, suffers immensely from the gimmick, with every opportunity to throw things at the screen looking terribly cheap these days, much in the same way that Jaws 3D did, only worse. I mean, in here, quite early on, we even get someone passing a spliff to someone else in the van by passing it directly at the camera, so it's coming out the screen. And maybe in 3D this was a fun gimmick to distract from the fact that the plot is dreadful. But when you watch it in 2D, it's quite blatantly obvious where they were trying to force the gimmick in, and it breaks every moment of the film with overused moments. There's a yo-yo flying at the screen at one point. Everything is just used for the gimmick. After that film, the lore of Jason and his unkillable powers is built upon and developed in rather bizarre directions by one point, and the victims in the film become tiresomely cliched with no reason to care for any of them. They are simply just tools for a variety of killings, and all that you're watching the films for is the body count. As each film sticks to formula, with the final girl aspect being developed quite early on so you can work out who's going to survive, and the rest are just there for you to just go, well, you're dead, how are you going to die? And yes, some of the deaths are creative, but when there's no reason to care for any of the victims, there's no reason to care for the deaths themselves. By the time of Jason Goes to Hell, where Jason can now possess other people to go and do his killings, it all became a little daft. And I breathed a sigh of relief when that one ended, even though I did know that I still had the sci-fi nonsense of Jason X to work through, with all its cheap production values to look forward to. But still, after watching all this franchise, I still had hopes that A24 and Fuller could do something with the property to make it more than a cheap Halloween knockoff. After all, there's a decent concept in here of the unkillable killer who raises himself from the dead each time to go on a murder spree to get vengeance on those who wronged him, and simply, in a Nightmare on the Street kind of way, other teens who are representative of those people who wronged him. But sadly, Brian Fuller has now exited the project, as expected. A24 still plan to go ahead with it, and I hope beyond hope that pans out. If anyone can bring something studio-wise to an old, tired property and make it stand out as something special, it's A24. So fingers crossed. But in the meantime, thanks to my brother-in-law, I now have 400 minutes of the Crystal Lake Memories documentary to work through to maybe see what people actually enjoy and find appealing about this franchise that has made it endure the decades in the manner that it has. But for me, that one watch through of all of the films was all that I needed to tell me that maybe I should have just stuck to those original 4 that I watched, because none of them got particularly better than them. Anyway, we'll be back with a normal podcast next week. In the meantime, watch more films, even ones that you're not sure that you wanted to watch.